9A, fund manager. Again, whole lot of questions. Why this provision was required, etc., etc. If it was really required, why you put all these conditions? Now, what is this? I'll just briefly give the broad overview of this. Here, a fund which is established in Mauritius. It's a fund which makes investments. Where does it get investments? Where does it get the money from? It gets money from several investors all over the world. That fund accumulates that investors' money, invests into various parts, various projects in India, outside India, wherever. And what happens? Who manages that fund? Typically, in a fund situation, you have a fund manager. Like in a mutual fund, you have an asset management company. So in these funds, you have a fund manager. So fund manager is really an advisor. Based on his advice, the funds the investments are bought and sold. These funds managers are typically stationed, or they are typically not in India. They are also placed outside India. And it seems from the explanatory memorandum that there was a requirement of the industry that the funds manager, if they are located in India, doing business in India would be simpler, and therefore you bring about conditions where that fund manager who is sitting in India, who is doing that business, should not be regarded as a permanent establishment of that fund, and therefore, if it is a permanent establishment, the profits of the fund would also be taxed in India. We don't want that. So far as the fund is concerned, whatever income so far as the investment manager is concerned, who is sitting in India, whatever income it earns, we will offer tax in India. But so far as the fund is concerned, whatever profit it earns outside India, we don't want to pay tax in India. So that appears to be the rationale, if one reads the explanatory memorandum, that ease of doing business in India, that fund manager, if he is located in India, that fund manager by itself will not be regarded as a business connection of that fund, and merely because of that fund manager being in India, that fund will not be regarded as a resident of India. These are the two provisions that they have made. Now, first of all, so far as resident in India is concerned, I don't understand. How would that presence of the fund manager in India can ever make that fund a resident of India? Because place of effective management concept is with the company. It is not with the funds or the trusts otherwise. So it's somewhat difficult to understand, but anyway, this is the provision that they have said. Now, having said that, objective well taken, they have put in various conditions. Various conditions they have put in. Insofar as the fund manager is concerned, and insofar as the fund is concerned, first of all, that fund manager has to be SEBI registered. That fund has to have a minimum corpus of 100 crores. The people from India should not have contributed more than 10% of the corpus. So you don't want round tripping, Indian money going abroad, coming back to India. You don't want that sort of a situation. More than 25%, it says you should have a minimum of 10 members. Now, there are practical difficulties. Several conditions are there, and several conditions have a lot of practical difficulties. And one of them, which I encountered yesterday, was that typically in these funds, you don't have, you have one more layer in between, which is called a feeder fund. There is a fund to which the funds are provided not directly by investors, but the fund is provided by another fund, which is sitting in some other country, which is known as a feeder fund. It feeds, that other fund accumulates money from the investors. That money is feeded to this fund sitting in Mauritius, from where this investment is made in India. Now, if you have that structure, you don't have more than 25 members at all. You have that one feeder fund who is a member of this fund. In such a situation, this provision is non-starter. And there are several such instances where various conditions that they have been put in are so onerous that it becomes difficult for one to really make this provisions workable. One of the conditions is that the remuneration paid to the Indian fund manager should be arm's length. Now, if that is a condition, first of all, that should be sufficient condition, because you're paying profits in India to the extent of an arm's length price, to the extent of the activity done in India. What more remains to be taxed in India? Really nothing. But you still have a host of other conditions, forget it. But the problem is, who will decide that that is arm's length? That decision will be on the department. The department will say that this is not an arm's length price, and if this is not an arm's length price and there is a difference of a small amount, the entire fund profits will be taxed in India and you go into litigation for 10 years to come. So, things which are mind-boggling. I mean, I don't see that these funds are really going to be, it will really start the way the government really wants to be. One of the conditions is that not more than 20% of the profits of the fund should go to the fund manager. Now, how can more than 20% of the profits go to the fund manager? You have already put a cap of Indian fund managers not exceeding, or Indian members to be not more than 10%. How can profits of 20% go to a fund manager? And after all, it has to be arm's length. Now, if it is arm's length, suppose 20% is arm's length, then what happens? Suppose that 20%, suppose that arm's length happens to be more than 20%, what do? You don't comply with one of the conditions. So, therefore, for the paucity of time, I'm not going bullet by bullet on each of the areas, but suffice it to say for the time being that these conditions are so onerous, especially even filing conditions, filing of various details is going to create, or rather not create difficulties, but this section will be non-standard. Nobody would really be wanting to come to India for this. That takes us to business trusts. Business trusts, two broad types of trusts: infrastructure investment trusts and real estate investment trusts. This provision was introduced last year in 2014. 2014 said that trust will have to be notified. Now that requirement of notification has gone from the definition of business trust. In September 2014, the SEBI came out with new regulations. Because earlier these type of trusts were also governed by AIF regulations, now they are governed by two separate regulations, now they are covered. Let's quickly look at the taxability of this. That's the sum and substance of all those complicated provisions that you have. The trust, we have to look at taxation in two hands, and taxation in the hands of the trust and taxation in the hands of the unit holder of the trust. Okay. First, coming to taxation in the hands of the trust, four types of income: rental income insofar as real estate trusts are concerned, interest income because you'll be investing in various SPVs, other business income or other income or business income, and capital gains per trust. These are four broad categories of income that we are talking about. So far as rentals and interest are concerned, we are told that it will not be taxed in the hands of the trust, and the person who will make payments also will not be liable to do a TDS under 194I or 194E. So not taxable in the hands of the trust. So far as the other two types of income are concerned, capital gain and other or business income, they will be taxable under section 150 UA2 and 111E or 112 if the case may be. So this is so far as taxation of trust is concerned. Exactly opposite is in the hands of the unit holder, and logically so, because insofar as rentals are concerned, it was exempt in the hands of the trust. Insofar as unit holder is concerned, it would be taxed in the hands of the unit holder. Here it is the concept of pass-through. Rental income received by the trust, exempt in the hands of the trust, it flows to the unit holder will be subject to tax as rent. And we are told that while paying that or distributing that income, there will be TDS to be done. The TDS will be 10% in case of a resident unit holder and the rates in force insofar as non-resident unit holder is concerned. Same way for interest, interest taxable in the hands of the unit holder, and the TDS will be again 10% and 5% depending upon resident and non-resident. And so far as business and other and capital gain is concerned, because it is already taxed in the hands of the trust, it will not be taxed in the hands of the unit holders. A specific exemption which is provided. Okay, this is a summary so far as the taxation of these business trusts are concerned. Let's come to the alternate investment funds. What are these alternate investment funds? Alternate investment funds are also a type of capital or collective investment funds. The SEBI regulations have category 1, 2 and 3 alternate investment funds. Category 1 is startup and early stages and infrastructure type of funds. Category 3 is a largely diversified and leveraged funds. And category 2 is other than 1 and 3 in the sense that there is no leverage permissible except for small business purposes, etc. You can borrow funds, otherwise you can't. And this category 2 can invest in unlisted securities and units of other AIF, etc. Now the tax provisions which are brought in are only for category 1 and 2 provisions. There are no provisions made for category 3. Okay? That is why this understanding of category 1, 2 and 3 becomes important. Now, here again, while the narrative slides are there, let's go straight to this diagram which will explain the tax provisions which are introduced now. Income earned by the alternate investment funds are categorized here into two types: profits and gains of business and other income. So far as business income is concerned, it will be taxable in the hands of the fund, and it will be taxed if it's a company or a firm at the rates applicable to it. If it is other than a company or a firm, because AIF can be an LLP, a trust, a company or a firm. Okay, so therefore, for other cases other than company or a firm, the tax will be at the maximum marginal rate. So if it's an LLP if it's a trust, a firm and LLP would be taxed at the same rate. But if it's a trust, it will be taxed at the maximum marginal rate. And so far as other income is concerned, it will be exempt in the hands of the fund, and correspondingly it will be taxed in the hands of the unit holder. Right? So far as unit holders are concerned, the business income will be exempt in their hands, and the other income will be taxed in their hands, and there is a provision for tax deduction at source at 10%. Now here, I think they have missed out on providing a separate rate of tax for when a unit holder is a non-resident. I tried to check up, a non-resident can also be a unit holder in an AIF, but they have not provided, to my mind, they have not provided a separate rate for non-resident holders. So it is a pass-through so far as other income is concerned, because it's taxed in the hands of unit holder, and it is not passed through so far as the business income is concerned. We are also told that if there is a loss incurred by the AIF, then AIF will carry forward the loss. So if it's a business loss, it will carry forward the loss against next year business profit. It will set off according to section 72 and then pay tax on the balance. If it is loss under the head capital gains, then also the AIF will carry it forward. Next year it will set off, and after setting off, whatever remains will be passed through insofar as the unit holder is concerned. So in other words, loss will not be carried forward in the hands of the unit holder. That is domestic transfer pricing. Our President had already made a mention about that. I don't know whether Bombay Chartered Accountants Society or whether the Institute would be happy with this, because some of us will be losing some tax audits, DTP audits. The limit has become 5 to 20. Anyway, a small provision so far as general entity avoidance rules are concerned. We are told that the deferral by a period up to assessment year 2018-19, and Finance Minister's speech has said that the transactions which will happen only after 1st April 2017 will be subject matter of GAR. It is not finding place in the provisions of the GAR at all, but it is there what the Finance Minister said. Therefore, the transactions which happen today will not have an impact at that stage. Or GAR will not be applied even if it has impact at that stage. Royalty and fees for technical services. probably one of the favorable amendments that they have done, which should ideally help the industry, the small entrepreneurs, to bring technology to India. I mean, this is probably in line with your Make in India theory, where you don't want the Indian entrepreneurs to strive or to starve rather of the foreign technology, and therefore the TDS rate has been brought down from 25% to 10%. Of course, surcharge would apply unless it's a treaty situation where surcharge will not apply. Otherwise, on this surcharge will apply. Global Depository Receipt, really speaking, this is an amendment which is consequential in nature, because the definition of at the time when the earlier provisions were introduced in 115 ACA, at that point of time a GDR could be issued only for listed shares. Now a GDR can be issued under the revised SEBI regulations. The GDR can be issued also in respect of the unlisted shares. And therefore, now they have clarified here that so far as the tax provisions are concerned, it would apply only in respect of listed shares and not in respect of unlisted shares. 153C, provision to undo certain decisions, where raid is undertaken on the premises of Mr. A. Certain valuable jewelry or documents are belonging to somebody else are found, and therefore that officer of that Mr. B is also informed, and there is an assessment made under these provisions for the period of 6 years also on that Mr. B. And in this context, there was litigation that what is the document that you are talking about which was found at the premises of A? Is that document on which my name is written or something which may pertain to me? Or is it a document which is really belonging to me? Is it a valuable which is really belonging to me? So the words earlier used were belonging to, and therefore it had a very narrow meaning, and therefore merely because some document or something which had a reference to that Mr. B, the rate would not be, or the assessment would not lie under section 153C. But now, so therefore you had those decisions to clarify this issue, or to where the words belonging to were judicially interpreted. But now, in order to nullify those decisions, we have this provision which is brought in to say that whether it is belonging to, or it is pertaining to, or it relates to this person, it would still be assessed under 153C. Provisions for avoiding repetitive appeals. This is already there so far as SSC is concerned. We now have a provision also for the department, and of course the SSC will have to be heard. Then there's certain order which is made appealable. The refusal for granting 1023C is now appealable to the tribunal. Single member cases, today we have a limit of 5 lakhs, it has now been increased to 15 lakhs, so smaller cases, more number of smaller cases will go to the single member tribunal. And they are saying that they will bring about rules for the foreign tax credit. We have experienced that in cases where a person has operations across the globe, and say for example the financial year in the other country is say January to December, financial year over here is April to March, and therefore how do you compute the income, how do you give release in respect of a tax credit, for which period income you count, for which period tax credit you give, should it be pro rata or it goes on from year to year. These type of problems were encountered in the past. And also what is the nature of proof that one gives? Should the TDS certificate be good enough? Should the return filing be given? Should the assessment order be given? So on and so forth. So probably in order to streamline those practical aspects, they say that we will now bring out rules to give clarity on how the tax credit has to be given. So this seems to be the intention. We'll have to wait and see what rules really come in. And as I said, there are more than 15 provisions where several rules have to be provided. Once those rules are in, probably one more seminar the chamber will have to organize. Till then, thank you very much for your patience.
We'll break for around 15-20 minutes and reassemble as soon as we can. The presentation of